All right, video 2 for today's lecture. What we're going to be doing today for this part is we're going to be setting up everything for the best optimal way of rigging our character. A couple tips and tricks along the way, some things that absolutely must be done, and if time permits in this video, I would like to actually get the HumanIK started in terms of setting up the bones and so on. If it ends up getting a little bit long, I'll make another video for that. Okay, so first thing that I did before anything else is I kind of trimmed out as much as I could from this. In other words, I didn't really need my reference anymore, so I got rid of those. I got rid of any extra elements that I experimented with because, again, don't need those either. And by the way, if you haven't done so already, this is something I'd also recommend you do, save as a new file every so often. These are all the files that have gone into me working with this. So it's quite a few that I've had to actually put in here. But anyways, in terms of what I'm doing here, now that I have my backup files safely saved, I can trim the extra areas to the point where I only have what I need, which is going to be my pants, my shirt, the face, prime, we're getting to that a little bit more, boots, my arms, my left eye, my right eye, my left eye, and my hair. That's all I really need at this point. I don't really need anything else. And I also made sure that every one of my objects, besides of course being named, also has its own layer. Now this is going to be helpful in situations where we have to lock elements in place, or if we just have to basically just freeze them all together. And then of course when all that stuff is done, don't forget to save. And one final thing I would say, well, there's actually two final things. One thing I would say that a person should do is also take some time to take a look at all the objects in your scene. And if you see a lot of elements like this, like some leftover elements, take the time to go to Edit, Delete by Type, History. Everything that you have in here is a liability of something that could cause problems later down the line. So my hair looks good, no inputs here. The only thing that you should see in the inputs, at least at this time, would be the hair, the actual layer that it's on. So arms layer, although nothing else is here. My shirt, that has some stuff, so I have to go to Edit again, Delete by Type, History. Actually, did I check the eyes? Oh, if I can't select them, just go to the actual area in your outliner. It sometimes does make the process way faster. But yeah, everything is checked and ready to go, at least in that respect. The last thing I would recommend doing is just making sure that your character is above the grid. Now, if you're a little bit concerned on if it's actually above the grid or not, you can make yourself a temporary plane. Just make sure it's big enough for our purposes. I'd say about a 10 by 10 should be enough. And Control Z. And then you should be able to just move your character above this. The reason why is when we get to the rigging, it usually works best if your character's feet are firmly on the ground. And of course, if you can't really tell, you can always go to your side view or your right view and check here. There we are. So that looks pretty good. Okay, so don't really need this ground anymore. If you do want to keep it just to be on the safe side later, you could always make a layer for it or just make a new one later. I don't really need this for now, so I'm just going to go gone. And of course, when all that's done, I'm going to save this so I don't have to do all that again. Okay, and I think we're ready to actually put the bones in place. So, one thing I would do beforehand is I'd actually do a little research first. And the research that I would be doing would be actually doing a quick little look at human anatomy, specifically bones being inside the actual person. Now, I got a lot of these images off Google Images. I've seen that some of these did come from human anatomy books, which is definitely going to be helpful. If you have access to a proper human anatomy book, whether it's going to be an art guide or even a medical guide, that could be a potential help as well. But the reason why I would look in these specifically is it helps with placement of your bones. Now, I've done this a while, but I did want to identify areas that would be important. One area that's, of course, important is where the actual foot rotates. A lot of rookies put it around where the heel of the bone is, but it actually ends up being around where the ankle is over here. When it comes to the knee, well, that one's actually kind of obvious. It ends up being right where this area bends. That's why we added that extra geometry. Hips tend to be a little bit tricky, as you definitely don't want to put the actual bending area right where the groin begins and the leg ends over here, but you actually want to put that inside the body a little bit. It will make it a little bit trickier to rig, but the results in terms of your bending will be way better because of it. The hip bone, obviously you're going to have your main hip over here, but the rotations usually aren't going to start until roughly around here and so on. And then, of course, where the actual two joints over here are going to meet, that's going to be roughly around this area. It is important to have a clavicle in there, so that's something I just want to identify right now. Where the neck is going to be, that's also a factor, because you need to make sure that that bends properly. And, of course, the biggest thing, and one of the biggest rookie mistakes that a lot of people make the first time they rig, is where the skull bone should be. A lot of people, first off, usually put that dead in the center. Like right around here, it ends up being a little bit higher, but you should really put your actual joint for the skull right below, around either below or around the ear area. So basically right around here. If you put it any higher, you potentially might start to bend your skull in a very unflattering way. So that's definitely not a good thing to do here. But if you have a general idea of where all your bones should be, it will save you quite a bit of frustration. So please keep this in mind. Now, I'm going to demonstrate just somewhere my bones are going to be. Most of you should be in a similar boat, so I'm not going to... so I'm going to be treating this as everyone's going to be in the same boat in this case. Now, some of my elements, like for example, my actual boot has these extra heel elements, but everything I'm going to be showing is still going to be similar to what everyone here is going to be doing. So no worries about that. Okay, so first thing I would do before actually putting the joints in there is I'd change my interface. Now what I mean by that is I need to turn on two things. The first thing I need to do is I need to turn on an option called X-ray joints. Now what that'll do, and I'll demonstrate this a little bit later as well, is it allows a person to see inside the joints inside the body without actually having to make the actual X-ray mode like what we saw before. In short, we'll be able to see exactly what we're doing. But besides that, you're not going to see anything at first, by the way. We also need to turn on an option called wireframe on shaded. Now what this does is it allows you, the user, to see all the wireframe elements on your character like so. Now the reason why this is kind of helpful is it'll allow you to identify where exactly your joints should be on your person. Because this way you could see areas that are going to bend like this. You'll be able to see areas that have bending topology like so. This is definitely going to be helpful for the arm. This is definitely going to be helpful for the fingers. And this is also going to be helpful, just making sure everything's on the up and up, for this area over here. And again, this is also one of the reasons why I made a layer for hair, so I could actually see where my ear is in this case. So I'm pretty much ready to roll then. But before anything else, I'm going to save. Not that I added that much, but still. Okay, now once we actually get the bones in place, we'll be saving as a new file. So let's go to the Create. And in this case, we're going to, once again, go to Create Skeleton. And this will create the basic skeleton for our purposes. Now in this case, they might be a little on the thin side. This is normal and okay. Because again, one of the reasons why it looks a little bit thinner this time is previously we were using centimeters instead of feet. Now that we're using feet, the joints are pretty tiny. So if I go to Create and I go to, not Create, I'm sorry, Display, Animation, Joint Size, I could turn up the joint size this way. I'm going to go very big, by the way, about maybe 40. So I have to actually manually put these elements in here. Much better. Okay, but this is what I was talking about with all the joints. Basically, even though the joints are inside the person, you'll notice that we can see inside of there. Oh, and by the way, a bit of a heads up. Joints have priority when it comes to selection. So I can select the body like so. You'll see it's selectable. But if I try and select all this at the same time, only the joints will be selected. It's one of those kind of weird things that in Maya that basically give the actual joints a little bit more priority. So it's something to get used to, but once you do it for a while, it will become second nature. Now, important thing to keep in mind, and hopefully everyone still has their person inside their area over here, you want to make sure that you do not, under any circumstances, move your character side to side, at least over here, or the character itself. If you do, there are going to be complications later. So if necessary, take a moment to make sure that the body is perfectly at 0, that the the shirt is perfectly at 0, that the arms are perfectly at 0. And again, I'm looking at this using the modeling toolkit. Yep, everything seems to be on the center, and that's good. Don't really need to worry about this so much. As long as you don't move it to side, you are golden. And I think we're ready to finally begin. So, first and foremost, your main priority is get the actual hips in place. Now, you're probably going to notice that everything else is going to be completely out of place. That's normal and okay. Just don't move this side to side at all. So that looks pretty good in that area. That looks good, pretty good here. Okay, once again, if possible, just get an idea of where your bones are supposed to be in conjunction to actual anatomy. It doesn't have to be 100% accurate, but the closer you are, the easier animation's going to be later. And once that's done, I'm going to go to my front view just temporarily, and I'm going to move this into place. Now again, you're not going to put your joint all the way outwards like so. It's going to be a little bit more on the inner part over here. I'm trying to actually get this in the middle of the leg if possible. Because again, if you take a look at the reference, it is around, it's not exactly in the middle, but it's decently close enough. There we are. And I'm going to do this on the side view as well. Okay. Now, if necessary, you could always just go on both sides simultaneously, but I think I'm okay over here. Now, once again, we need to basically move this knee so it's a little bit over. But what I'm going to do first is I'm going to use the double click, and I'm going to go to my axis orientation. I'm going to change this from world to object. Now, you're probably not going to notice a big difference at first, but when I rotate, you will. But before I rotate, I just want to get this in the area where the knee is going to be bending. So that's roughly going to be right around here. Now, I'm sure that your first instinct would be to move this over. Do not go with that instinct. What you want to do is, instead of moving that, use the rotation instead. This way, when it actually bends, it's going to be quite a bit more convincing. And as you can see, the orientation has stayed relatively in place. Eventually, you might be in a situation where you do have to move it a little bit. But as long as you keep it relatively close, at least in that view, you should be in good shape. You might need to move this in the side view, and only the side view, a little bit forward. It'll help with your bending. But that should be it at least there. Now try once again to get your heel in the right area. Now the warnings I'm kind of giving right now are specifically made for limbs. So if areas like the spine, you can bend some of these rules that I'm giving you, but I'm using the move tool over here, and I'm just moving that straight upwards. I'm not moving side to side. And just going to make sure. Yeah, you'll see that the other foot's kind of in a weird spot, but that's normal and okay. But I need to find where my ankle is, and I'm generally in the ballpark here. Again, going forward and back, that's fine. And that part's good. So the toe, that's basically this last little joint over here, I could actually move this with little problem. Because again, this is kind of an independent toe, so I don't need to worry about this as much. So I'm going somewhere in the middle-ish area, not too middle though. There we are. So I think everything is good then. Excellent. Oop, almost forgot an important step. That would have been pretty bad. If you haven't done that yet, do it now. Lock this up. Okay, good. I didn't have to turn this into a fire marshal Bill part. But again, once you actually have all the bones and everything else set up, which I kind of had already, so I didn't need to change anything, thank goodness, you have to lock it up immediately. If you don't, your bones potentially will disappear. And I don't mean that figuratively, I mean that literally. Your bones will disappear, and you have to start over again. But if you lock it up, you're good. So I've even gotten this far, and it looks like I'm okay. But nevertheless, I'm going to test this out just to see how the other side goes. It might take a moment, but... Well, now if anything else, that was a learning moment for us. This is why you have to lock this up first. If you don't, this is the accident that's going to happen. So, if anything else, it's a nice teaching moment for us. So I'm going to delete this because this is going to be more trouble than it's worth. And I'm going to create a new skeleton entirely. So I'm getting out of here. There we are. So now that that's done, I'm going to go create skeleton. And the moment you're done with everything here, lock it up. So again, I didn't get too far in this, thank goodness. And again, if anything else, it was worth having to do this again if you learn one thing today. And that is, make sure you lock that up the moment, and I mean the very moment, you know you have all the joints you need. And again, I do. So, okay, so my center part is done. That's the part that's very important here. And again, I'm going to move this upwards. I'm going to try to put this in the middle of here the best I can. Need to make sure that the side is coinciding with this. Looks like it is. Again, I'm going to use the move tool for the knee to move this up. Now you might have to move it a little bit more after you're done, but once it's in the general area, that's when you can, don't move this, because again, it will mess up how your knee bends. Rotate this area, again if you have to, double click the rotation, make sure it's on object, and just rotate this slightly. Just try and keep this in the middle the best you can. And again, if you have to move it up or down, which fortunately I do not, then so be it. But the next area, I'm going to use the move tool to move this up around where my ankle is supposed to be. You'll be able to see it a little bit better on the side view, by the way. And most likely, and this is just something I recommend, for the knee, this one you can move forward and only forward a little bit, and then move the ankle back a bit. Again, this is going to help out with your bending a little bit later. But again, you want to keep any kind of movement of an actual joint, or should I say limb, to a minimum. But now that's good. And I can move my toe. Now this one, again, I can move a little bit more freely. Because again, this is not part of a joint. This is not part of a limb. This is a kind of a free entity. And I'm just putting this roughly a little bit lower than the middle. And just make sure it's over here. There we are. So that's, at least for me, that's working out pretty nicely for me. Okay, now I'll wait for the other ones when I'm done with the other side. So I'm not going to quite do that right away. Now with the spine, similar thing. I could either move these, again, since these aren't actual joints, that's part of a limb or something like that, I have a little bit more freedom to move these. Now to put these joints in perspective, this is basically, again, where my spine is going to begin. This is where the middle of the rib cage is going to be. That's the second joint. And the third area is basically where my arms are going to meet in a sense. So if we're planning this from our little reference over here, this is where my first joint's going to be. This is where my second joint's going to be. This is where my third joint's going to be. And with that, my spine will be complete. So this is going to go down a little bit. This one is roughly going to go where the rib cage is, so that's going to be a little higher. And this one is going to be a little lower. Actually, no, that's going to be right where it is. And this is going to be the clavicle, and that's going to be basically around here. Now the clavicle is kind of an important bone because with this, as some of you might remember from last semester, this is important for this to actually go up and down for your shoulder. Without this, trying to raise your hand, at least the way that we normally do it, would be borderline impossible without breaking some bones. So in short, this is kind of an important one. But let's take a look at the side, make sure everything's lining up okay here. Ooh, definitely see some areas where we can fix a couple things. Again, it's not going to be directly in the center. It's going to favor the back if you see like a real spine. This area is going to be in a similar fashion. I'm going to double check here just to make sure I'm on the right bone. Okay, cool, I am. This one's going to go back a little bit. And yeah, the next area is going to be my neck. Before I go any further, I'm going to save this as a new file because I don't want to save over my old one, just in case there's some weird shenanigans going on. Okay, so this is going to be called Rig 01 for me. You can name yours however you wish, just make sure you know which is which. I probably could have just named this HumanIK as well, or HumanIK Start. But anyway, so here's the neck. And again, if I can't see what I'm doing, just take a moment to turn off your hair layer. And again, just think, where is your neck going to begin? So this area probably could go a little bit further down. This area could go a little bit further up. Yeah, that looks nice. And just make sure it favors the back a little bit more. This area is pretty good. Okay. And then the skull, you're going to use the move tool. And again, you can move this without any real problems. Just make sure it's basically where a little bit where the ear is going to be. I usually try and put mine below the ear so it kind of bends in a nice way. But yeah, something like this should be sufficient for our needs. Yeah, there we are. Anything higher and we're basically bending our head in half, and that definitely is not a good thing. Okay, now those are the simpler parts. I'm going to save what I have now. Now's the tough part, the arm. Now the arm itself isn't really that bad. It's the fingers that can take you some time. So definitely take a moment to allocate enough time for this. It's usually best if you can get the whole body done in one go. So I definitely wouldn't recommend doing this little by little. I would say get the body ready first, save. If you need a break, take one. If you need to, look what I just did. And the second part should be getting the actual bones in place. But again, this tends to be where it's the most difficult. But at least for the arm, and again, this is one of the reasons why I had everyone make their bodies the way that they did, we could basically just put the arm relatively in place. And again, you have to, I would recommend taking a look at your human anatomy. And yeah, it looks like I'm generally in the ballpark of where I'm supposed to be. And this is one of the reasons why, if you can bring the arm down, like what we did here, it's usually better to do it this way in terms of bone placement and skinning later. But you will see some models where the arms are out. But this is working out pretty nicely for me in terms of where the shoulder's supposed to be. For me, it's quite simple to find. Hopefully everyone has shoulders that are almost as simple. Now, something to kind of keep in mind, if you still need to fix this up, you still are at that point where you can, try to flatten out the bottom part of your arm. You will find if you can flatten out the bottom part of the arm over here where the body and the arm meet, it will make it easier to bend the actual arm itself. But once you think you have it in the appropriate area, rotate this. So I'm going to be doing mine on the, I'll bring this back a little bit. And I'm going to bring this down. Once again, you're trying to make sure that you're in the middle of the arm the best you can make it. Now this area you can bend, because again, this is just going to be an area for the shoulder section. It's this part that's going to be way trickier. If you bend too much, it's going to have problems. Or sorry, if you move it too much, it's going to have problems bending. Yeah, that looks okay. I'm going to move this up to where my elbow is supposed to be. Going to move this back a little bit. That should make it a little bit easier to bend. I'm going to move this up. Like I said, it's not so much the body parts that are going to be a pain in the butt. It's going to be the hand that's going to be the worst part. And again, just try and fit this in the best that you can. But as I said before, there might be a situation or two where you might need to move it yourself. But again, if you can, keep the bending to a minimum. I think that should work though. And there's my wrist. Bringing this down, bringing this back. I hope, if anything else, having to do a model like this gives you appreciation for when riggers have to do this themselves. Because if you're trying to rig anything, it takes time. Now, at this point, you might need to turn down the size of your bones a little bit so that they can fit in your fingers a little bit easier. The good news is that if you identify where the finger bends, it does make things way easier. Before I go any further, I'm going to save what I have. And again, I'm going to try to move the fingers in place. Now, again, if necessary, go to joint size, and you're going to want to change this to a smaller number. Ah, perfect. So 10 seems to work pretty well here. Now, one thing that's a little bit tricky about hands, and you can somewhat see it here, but you definitely want to get some good references on here, is when you actually bend your finger, your first instinct might be to bend them like at the end over here. That, while that would be a natural place to think this, the area that's going to bend is most likely going to be here. So that's just something to kind of keep in mind when you're doing this. If you take a look at some good references, you'll see it's kind of similar with that. So I'm moving this back. The first joint's usually the toughest. I can move this up without too much of a problem. Just try and get that finger in the middle there the best you can. But I think I got it. Worst case scenario, hit F so that you can focus on just that area. There we are. If anything else, this is probably going to take the most amount of time. And this is one of the reasons why I recommend if possible. The keyword is if possible. Just take your time with this. Get it right the best you can. So here's where it's going to be bending. I'm going to go back here. This is where this area is going to bend. And try and keep the finger, the last joint, that's this joint over here, to the fingertip. So each of these joints is going to have 4 sections. I'm not happy with that. I'm going to move that forward a bit more. Bring this back a little bit. Again, this is why the orientation thing that I showed you before, double click here, change the axis orientation to object. It makes this way easier. And rinse and repeat. The hard part is making sure you just get the right joint. The pinky tends to be one of the more challenging areas. But the other areas could be a pain in the butt too, because you don't have to rotate them as far, thank goodness. But trying to find the exact spot they need to be in, that's tricky. And there we are. Again, once you have the right spot, just use the arrows to move your elements. There we are. Okay. It's going to go out a little bit more because, again, you want to make sure that your hand is completely straight. Again, take some time. So don't be afraid if it takes a little bit more time than you expect. I would say that usually doing a rig like this is probably going to take you an hour. And that's fine. But again, if you don't remember to hit that lock, as you saw previously, that basically is going to tack on some time. Imagine getting this far and not doing the lock. There we are. The last one here is going to be this one. Hopefully won't be quite as bad as some of the others. It's been a while since I'm going to save this. And just going to bring this up. Again, just trying to put this in the middle of my finger as best I can. Then rotate this so that it has the right kind of axis, which it looks like it does. Very cool. It looks like it's going a little bit at an angle, so I want to rotate this just a smidge. Perfect. That looks good. Although I think this could probably hug the tip of that finger a little bit more. There we go. Cool. So it takes a little bit of time, but this is hopefully how your finger should look. Last part here is just getting the thumb. Now, once again, the thumb can be a little bit misleading in terms of how the bones are done. Now, it's a little hard to see here, so you might need to... So let's see if we can actually get a little bit of a closer look. So let's see. Human anatomy, hand, bones, inside skin. Okay, perfect. Again, this is why it helps to get good references. The way that the bone structure is made for the thumb, you don't actually have your first bone all the way out here, but it's actually inside the middle of the hand. If you actually take a look at your own opposable thumb, that's basically how this is makes this work. Without this, you couldn't rotate your thumb upwards to be able to grab onto something quite as easily. So this bone is quite important to the process, and it's going to be inside the actual hand itself. I would say the actual joint where the hand comes out, it's going to be a little bit forward compared to that. Then the second joint is going to be here, the third joint is going to be here, and the last joint is going to be on the tip. So again, the better references you get, the easier this is going to be, and the more accurate your animation is going to be later. So it takes the time to do a little research first. So let's bring this up a little bit. Now this one I can actually bring in a little bit more like this. So again, this is an unusual joint, so I can actually move this where I need this to be. Ideally, you don't want to move it if you can, but again, this is a very strange little joint, so if necessary, move it a bit. So, but yeah, this area is going to be around where this part of the hand is going to be. Here's the second joint. Yep, there's the third. There we are. And the last joint is over here. Hitting F to get a little closer. And that looks pretty close. Cool. I'm going to save what I have first. But those bones were put in pretty good time. So fingers crossed. All the joints are ready. I'm going to hit the main center of mass, or basically the main parent of everything. Hit this button and hope for the best. And fortunately, it looks like it's basically doing that again. Okay. In the rare situation, but the situation where that does happen, you can actually scale, as long as it's uniformly scaled, aka the scale down here, to scale this area, that's basically the character, to basically be the size that's over here. Now again, that rarely happens, as you saw previously. That did work, but it still sometimes might happen. So as much as it kind of stinks when it does happen to us, it's always good to be able to adjust and change afterwards. So I'm basically scaling this to the size it needs to be. The hardest part here is just making sure that the fingers are in the right spot. And again, I can actually select all three of these at the same time and get a better look for this. I think that got it. And again, you'll see that both sides are perfectly placed, so that's good. That area is looking pretty good. Yeah. So again, hopefully you don't get into that situation that I just got into, but should that happen, I think if you put it at a value of 330.5 and just make sure that all of them have the same value, it has to be the same. It cannot be even a millimeter different. This should fix it. 30.5. Yeah, that should do it. Excellent. Well, again, it's unideal when these situations happen, but if we can figure out, if you're able to fix it, it's always a good thing. Now, just going to save what I have. And one last thing that I would strongly recommend you do before anything else is turn on your control rig. The reason why I'm telling you to turn on your control rig is it'll basically make sure that the joints that are over here basically work the way they're supposed to. And looks like I might have to do this again, but that's okay. As long as you're able to make sure that this works the way it's supposed to, you should be in good shape. I'm going to make this whole thing over again, and by the next video, we should all be in the same spot. So again, my biggest issue is I think I made a previous one, and that's why I'm having the issues that I'm having. So I'm going to make the whole thing one more time, and I will meet everyone at this point. So this is where we're going to stop for now.